name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. Welcome back, everybody, to another rousing episode. Um, you know, one of the things I've noticed over the years is that when people talk about relationships, they usually talk about what they gain from them. The connection, intimacy, trust, support, love, all of these different things, right? They get built between two people over time. But what people don't, talk about as often is what gets left behind. And I'm not talking about, there's some instance to directly point at, or we haven't turned this into some massive telenovela type of thing. I'm talking about controlling relationships or toxic relationships. I'm not talking about these types of things, or, I am talking about something much more ordinary than that stuff. Look, you meet somebody, you spend time, you get to know them, you guys start building a life together, right? Relationship grows stage by stage. Things start to get serious, right? Now, somewhere in the middle of that, though, a lot of people slowly stop doing some of the things that made them who they were before the relationship ever started. Now, before I get into today's show, I want to thank everybody who continues to listen. Share the show, reach out afterwards, right? Beijing, Hong Kong, welcome. A couple of listeners from Far East. Again, don't know what the scene's like there. Love to hear from you. Please drop me a line. Russia, starting to get a few more listeners from there. Again, I don't know what the scene looks like there. I'd love to hear from you, and to the rest of you that keep coming on in. Canada, the US, of course, Oz, and a few other places around the world. I see all of your messages, every one of them, and I'm glad you're here. All right. If you're listening to me on Spotify, do me a favor if you have it on the app, click the 3 buttons, rate the show 5 stars. This allows the show to keep growing, keep it where it's at. If you follow me on YouTube, like and subscribe. That way you'll know when a new episode drops. Yes, I have to constantly check that thing to take it from private to public. I don't know why YouTube keeps doing that to me, but it does. And you know what? If you found value in any of these conversations and you want to support the show, there's a link. Go ahead, click it, donate what you want. I do need to add this caveat, and you guys are going to notice a couple of you said this past couple of weeks, Chris, I see you've changed it. I had to, and real quick, I'm not going to go into why, but I put a $5 minimum on there because there was some nefarious activity being done by people that I don't really know. So I had to make a change, right? Anyway, let's get back to it. All right. Now, I think there is a strange irony sitting underneath a lot of relationships. Very often we're attracted to someone because they have a life of their own interests, hobbies, friendships, goals, jobs, all of these things, right? They have a sense of identity, and there's something about them that is individual and distinct. And that thing makes them interesting to us. And then over time, we get into a relationship, right? And it grows. And, we start giving, sometimes over time, we start giving a little bit less. But what we're doing is we're actually detracting from the very things that brought the relationship together. And it's not because anyone asked them to or even forced them to. It just happens. It's a natural progression, right? When we're single, we have a lot more times to do stuff with our friends, or go to the museum, or go to a bar, or whatever you're into, right? I'm not just singling out 2 random things. Anything, beach, all right? It just happens. And the question I want to explore today is why the person we fell for can sometimes slowly start disappearing, and why most people don't realize it's happening until they feel disconnected from themselves. So we're going to start here. What are we actually drawn to? Now, think about the people you've been most attracted to throughout your life. If you had to explain why they stood out, you could probably come up with a long list of reasons. Chemistry, you found them attractive, it felt easy, right? And a lot of people stop there. But I think there's another piece of the puzzle that often gets overlooked. What catches our attention is not just who the person is with us, it's who they are when we're not around. And there is something compelling about a person who is already engaged in their own life. They carry things and they carry themselves in a way that is different because those things, their personal life matters to them. Their time is invested somewhere else, right? So when we meet them and we get a sense that, they're moving and they've got a different pace, that's what we're kind of drawn to, right? They have friendships they value, the interests they hold that occupy them on the weekends, right? There are parts of their identity that exist independently of any romantic relationship. Now, whether we consciously recognize it or not, it creates attraction. And I think a lot of people miss this because they focus on visible qualities. They remember being drawn to somebody's confidence or humor or intelligence or independence, whatever it is. So, what gets overlooked here is where those qualities came from in the first place, right? Confidence gets built on experience. Independence is learning how to stand on your own 2 feet. Even humor tends to come from more naturally, you know, I don't want to say the word gifted, but people who are just comfortable being themselves and don't mind having a poke at themselves or others in good fun, right? Sometimes, yes, humor is a defense mechanism, but that's not where I'm going, right? When you start pulling those qualities apart, though, you find a person who's developed a solid relationship with their own life, right? And when people tell you the story of how they met someone, you can hear this without even realizing. They talk about the woman who is passionate about her career, or the guy who disappeared every weekend because he was rebuilding his old car in his garage that his dad gave to him, something, right? Somebody else will remember a partner who was constantly planning their next hiking trip or, evenings working on some sort of project. The actual activity is rarely the point here. Nobody falls in love with a motorcycle restoration project. Nobody becomes captivated by the hiking trail. What attracts us is seeing somebody connected to something that matters to them. That connection tells us something important. It tells us that person has a life and they have interests beyond getting attention or finding a partner, right? That they're comfortable by themselves. There's a sense that their identity is already in place and we aren't stepping into some sort of empty space that needs to be filled. We're stepping into a life that is already has shape, direction, follow through, right? And I see this all the time inside the lifestyle as well. You know, a sub describes meeting a Dom who was grounded and steady and secure in who they were. And, I've had also Doms talk to me about being drawn to a sub who understood their boundaries and communicated early. Now, neither person is describing perfection, they're describing somebody who knows themselves. There is certainly there's certainty here that comes from having a sense of identity, and people tend to find that attractive. Now, what makes this particularly interesting is that very few people consciously think about attraction this way. We talk about compatibility, right? We talk about the chemistry and all of those shared things we like to do. And absolutely, these things matter. I'm not saying they don't. But at the same time, much of the attraction begins when we encounter somebody who feels like a complete individual. I'm not talking about somebody who has everything figured out. I don't even think those people exist, to be honest. I know I didn't, and I'm still figuring out life, right? I'm talking about somebody who has a life that belongs to them. They have a world that continues existing whether they're in a relationship or not. And that's where this conversation starts to get interesting. Because if individuality is one of the things that draws us toward another person, if a sense of self is what creates attraction in the first place, then why do so many relationships gradually move towards the opposite direction? It's a big question, isn't it? And why do people who were originally fascinated by each other's independence often find themselves years later feeling disconnected from the very qualities that brought them together? And that's the question I want us to start exploring together today, right? So let's talk about how the shift begins. Now, nobody wakes up one morning and describes they're going to lose themselves in a relationship. They don't sit down and think, you know what? I'm going to stop investing in my friendships and start, not pursue anything I like anymore and just make this person the center of my world. If that were how it happened, most people would catch it instantly, right? They would recognize the problem and make adjustments long before things went too far. The reality here is much more subtle. Most of the time, it begins with things that are completely normal. You meet someone, you like being around them, right? So now, you're starting to figure it out. Maybe after a couple of dates, you just, getting to know them through a party and barbecues or whatever, and you want to start spending more time with them. You make plans, you find ways to create space for them in your schedule because that's what happens when you're excited about somebody else. Now, there's nothing unhealthy about that. In fact, if we're being honest, it's one of the best parts of a new relationship. You enjoy their company, they enjoy yours. There's anticipation, excitement, curiosity. You're learning about each other. You're slowly building a foundation of something, not necessarily, a relationship yet. You're just building something together. Now, nobody should listen to this episode and walk away thinking that closeness itself is the problem. That's not what I'm talking about, and it isn't. What I'm talking about is when the shift begins because every decision makes sense when viewed on its own. If you skip one evening with your friends because you'd rather spend time with your partner, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Or if you take your hobby and you push it back a week or two or even a month because life got busy and your free time is limited, that seems reasonable too, right? There's nothing alarming about any one of those choices, right? But it's when months pass or even years, and without realizing, you start organizing more and more of your life around the relationship. And what makes this difficult to notice is that it doesn't feel like you're giving things up, right? It feels like you're gaining something. You're gaining that connection and intimacy and in all those experiences and adventures you're doing together. You're building a life with someone, right? Now you are in formation mode, foundation mode of relationship. So on the inside of it, it looks like progress. So this is where I think the psychology becomes interesting. Now, human beings are wired for connection. We want belonging, closeness. We want to feel important to somebody, right? So when those things are being met, it feels good. The brain rewards those experiences because relationships have always been important for survival. Being connected feels safe. Being chosen feels meaningful. Now, as a result, most people don't recognize the difference between increasing intimacy and increasing dependence. Now, those two things aren't the same thing, right? Intimacy allows two people to become closer while remaining individuals. Dependency gradually shifts more and more responsibility for their emotional well being onto the relationship itself. Now, in the beginning, the difference is almost impossible to see. You start sharing more of your life with someone, then you're starting to look, to them first when something good happens, right? And then you're leaning on them when something difficult happens. And eventually they become the primary source of comfort and reassurance and even emotional support. And look, none of that is inherently unhealthy. The problem appears when the other parts of your life begin shrinking at the same time. Now, your friendships become less active, right? All of a sudden, you're not doing the personal things you used to enjoy prior to the relationship. You kind of slowly start giving them up. And any goals you had that once mattered get pushed further and further, down the line. So parts of your identity that existed before the relationship start receiving less time and less energy and less investment. The relationship keeps growing while everything else becomes smaller. Now, most people don't experience this as a loss. They experience this as closeness. And that's why it often goes unnoticed for years. The relationship begins taking up more emotional space, more mental space, more of your decision making processes, and all of the attention becomes focused on maintaining the connection because the connection now carries so much of the importance in your life. So, what started as an important part of life gradually becomes an organizing principle of it. And that's the point where things begin changing in ways people don't always recognize. The relationship is no longer simple, right? It's just something you have. And it's becoming a place where you get, your sense of belonging or security or even your sense of self. Now, that sounds all good and dandy and sounds romantic when it first starts happening. The problem is that it creates consequences most people don't see until much later. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So, why it feels good while it's happening. This is where we're at. We really need to talk about this part because this is the internal chemistry part of it going on for us, right? The reason it feels good while it's going on is because the relationship is no longer providing just connection. It's giving us things that used to come from other areas in our lives. Now, before I talked about how people are attracted to someone who has a life of their own, right? Friendships and goals and routines and identity, right? Independent of the relationship. The problem isn't that those things suddenly disappear. It's that over time, the relationship can begin replacing some of those functions that those things once served, right? Our friendships provided belonging, our goals gave us a direction, our hobbies gave us fulfillment and enjoyment, and even our accomplishments gave us confidence, right? When those things are active in our life, our identity is spread across multiple areas. No single thing is carrying all of the weight. As the relationship grows, though, the relationship starts providing these things, right? Belonging, comfort, right? We get reassurance and validation. And when something exciting happens, they're the first person you want to tell, right? And conversely, if something bad happens, they again are the first person you want to call. Now, slowly, more and more emotional importance gets concentrated into one space. And most people don't even notice it because it feels like love and commitment and partnership. And guess what? From the inside, it feels as though the relationship is becoming deeper and more meaningful. And in a lot of ways, it is. The problem is that something else can be happening at the same time. The relationship is becoming responsible for the needs that were once being met by a lot of different parts of life. And this is where I think people start confusing intimacy with identity, right? On the one hand, intimacy is sharing your life with another person. On the other, identity is knowing who you are, whether that person is standing beside you or not. Healthy relationships increase intimacy. They create more connection and trust and vulnerability. And at the same time, both people continue investing in themselves, growing and maintaining parts of their lives that belong to them. When that stops happening, the relationship can slowly become the primary source of the identity. So a person begins thinking less about who they are becoming and more about who they are within the relationship. Their emotional world starts revolving completely around the connection, right? So a good week feels like life is going great, and a difficult week in the relationship feels like everything's falling apart. The shift here is important because it often happens without conscious awareness. And nobody decides they want another person to become the center of their emotional world. They don't sit down and plan it out while, grabbing their hands and chuckling maniacally, right? Every step feels like you're building something meaningful together. That's why people rarely recognize the transition when it's happening. What began as a relationship, you know, becoming an important part of life slowly turns into a relationship becoming the place where the life is experienced. And when that happens, something else starts changing as well. The relationship begins to carry more weight than it was ever designed to carry. And the consequences of that don't usually, show up real soon. What does happen, and it affects almost everything, is they show up a little bit later. And that's where I want to go next. Before I get back into this show is supported by Enhanced Mind Counseling. A lot of what I've been talking about today is the kind of work I do with people directly, looking at relationship patterns, understanding why certain dynamics become so important to us, and figuring out what's actually happening beneath the surface. Sometimes the issue isn't the relationship itself. Sometimes it's the role that that relationship has started playing in our life. The security it provides or the validation it gives, that's the kind of work I help people sort through. If that's something you're trying to understand in your own life, you can reach out through my website. There's a link in the show's description. All right, let's get back to it. When the person they fell for slowly disappears, this is where I want to go next. As a lot of relationships become more central to our lives, something interesting starts to happen. Now, a lot of people assume greater closeness, right, should create security. Now, on the surface, that makes a lot of sense. If two people are more connected and more invested, things should feel more stable. Yet, for a lot of people, the opposite begins to occur. Anxiety starts increasing, smaller problems feel bigger than normal. Even a disagreement over something tiny feels relationship threatening, right? So, a change in communication, even that gets noticed. And people find themselves worrying more about needing more, reassurance and become more sensitive to the shifts in the relationship. They confuse, this whole confusing part is often what happens when the relationship itself hasn't become worse. It's what ends up happening is the change of the amount of weight the relationship is carrying. Now, earlier I talked about how relationships can gradually become the primary source of belonging and validation and even emotional stability. And once that happens, any threat to the relationship feels bigger because the potential loss is bigger. So the relationship is no longer simply just a relationship. It has become the place where a person experiences much of their emotional life and identity. Imagine putting all of your money into a single investment. Now, most people would understand why that might create anxiety. If everything is tied to one place, any movement feels important. And relationships can function the same way. The more parts of your identity become concentrated inside of the relationship, the more pressure the relationship carries. And that pressure affects both of you. One of you might become more dependent on reassurance, right? And the other person may begin feeling responsible for maintaining all of the emotional stability. Now, nobody intends on this to happen. It just starts to happen through the years very slowly, right? And there's also an irony sitting underneath all of this. The qualities that originally created attraction often begin receiving the least attention. The person who once spent time with their friends now rarely sees them, if at all. And the other person who had a whole lot of hobbies or interests on the outside keeps saying they're going to get back to him someday, but you know what? 3, 4 years have went by and they haven't touched him, right? None of these changes happened overnight. Most people don't even notice them while they're occurring. They simply wake up one day feeling disconnected from themselves without fully understanding why. And what makes this particularly difficult is that many people respond by trying to move even closer. They assume the solution is more connection, reassurance, and time together. Yet the problem was never a lack of closeness. The problem was that too much of life became organized around the single connection. And that's why some people eventually find themselves asking questions they never expected to ask before. They wonder why they feel lost, or, their confidence has changed, or wonder why they no longer feel like the person they used to be. And in a lot of cases, the answer is surprisingly simple. They spent years trying to become closer to someone they loved while unintentionally investing less and less in themselves. And over time, the relationship became stronger, but the individual became smaller. And that's the strange irony at the center of all of this. The very qualities that created the attraction in the first place are often the qualities that people slowly stop nurturing as the relationship grows. Now, As I kind of bring this to a close today, the goal of a relationship was never to become less of yourself. The goal was to share your life with another person. And those two things, they're not the same. The healthiest relationships I've ever seen over the years are not built around two people disappearing into each other. They're built around two people continuing to grow while choosing to remain connected. There is room for closeness and commitment and partnership. And at the same time, there's still room for individuality. That's important because parts of you that existed before the relationship matter. All of those private, interests you had, those all matter. Your friendships, things that challenged you, your goals, things that excite you, that gave your life meaning before the relationship, those all matter. Those things are not competing with the relationship. They're part of what allows you to continue showing up as the complete person inside of it. And I think a lot of people spend years to protect the relationship without realizing they're slowly neglecting themselves. So the intention is usually good. They want to be a better partner, present, right? But somewhere along the way, they stopped asking whether they're still investing in parts of themselves that made them who they are. So I'm going to leave you with a question today, like I always do. And I think it's important because we need to have these. It's going to be a short one, but I think it's going to impact a lot of you. And I want to hear the comments. I want to read them. Email, put it on Spotify, Substack, Fetlife, wherever you're following me, right? How much of your life still belongs to you? I need you to think about that. All right, a couple things. So we're at the end here. Yes, I'm directly advertising my practice. Why? Because I've never done it before. Yes, I'm just doing it now. It's what supports the show. So I just want, for some of you weren't very clear, that's what I do. That's my practice. So that's why I'm doing it. Hopefully that answers that question. I've covered before. I covered it last week, why I've changed my writing style. I really don't want to go back over that, or maybe I didn't in full, but I'm not going to really go back over it. Can I expand on why I changed my thing? I really don't want to with the link for the sponsor or donations and stuff. I'm just going to leave it as is. I don't control all that stuff, but and it's not really a big deal. It's not about hiding, or there's no mystery to it. There's no real need to talk about it. How's it coming with my second book? Well, right now I find myself having a little bit more time, so I'm spending some more time. I'm in brainstorming and early outline. I've got a first couple of things outlined. I've got the table of contents kind of outlined. I think the direction before I refine it. So it's probably the first draft or second, and I call like the first chapter. That's about it. And this question, do I see people? Yes, I see people internationally. It doesn't matter where you are. I can work with you. I mean, just deal with that as it comes, right? Timing and distance and all these things. Other than that, yeah. Why did I do today's show? What's the point behind it? Because I have been seeing today a lot. Well, not just today. I've been seeing these past few weeks people talking about losing themselves. And over the last couple of months, working with a couple of the couples that I do, talk about feeling that emptiness, like lost inside of the relationship. And so I always ask them about their prior interests and what they used to do and that attraction, right? So I thought this was really apropos to bring in today and discuss, because this is one of the things we tend to neglect about ourselves. We get wrapped up in the relationship, and it's fine. It's healthy. There's nothing wrong with that, especially when it's NRE. But when you're like a couple of years in, right, gotta maintain some other things. Got asked, do I think anything about Atlanta? No, not really. I read a post this morning for the context. Atlanta's struggling with some of its venues. I think venue owners around the world are struggling. And I think it's a twofold problem. First off, venue owners can't really, and this, I don't want to detract from the show, so I'll just give you a quick comment on this. I think venue owners are getting away from what BDSM used to be, and they're kowtowing too much. do what you want to do, but have responsibility, right? You need to be present. If somebody's hosting something at your thing and you own the place, you still need to be there because ultimately you're in charge and it's your name on the door, right? And you're not going to please everybody. I don't please everybody with my show, and I'm not trying to sound mean, but I don't care. If you're upset by what I'm saying because you don't agree, well, I'm not, then let's talk about it. But I can't do a show that pleases everybody. I've rarely done a show that pleases everybody, right? I can't even write about a subject because it pleases everybody. So just figured I'd kind of throw that out there. The show's important. Our relationships, what we do, these are my final thoughts here. What we do inside of them as we build that life, we got to stay in the individuals because remember, guys, that's what attracted us. I can think of every person I've dated or subs and slaves and stuff that I've met over the years, over the decades. It's really scary to say that. And I think about all these people and they were individuals and I love the things, it's nothing against homebodies, but I didn't date a lot of people that I didn't want to become their world. I'll just say it very clearly. I don't think anybody wants to. We always like, when somebody's got a lot going on because we want to then see where can we fit in their life. It's just slowly, we want to make sure that we balance out our lives. We still want to, maybe go out, not every weekend with the guys, but get together every once in a while, have a barbecue, right? Go out with the girls or go to your pottery class or your art class or go to a cooking class, whatever kept your individuality before the relationship, because it's a balance, right? You have to be comfortable in your individuality first before you're going to, look into a relationship anyways. Relationships aren't the fix. And if you're using it for that, reach out. Let's have a conversation, right? So here's my question for you all one more time. And then I'm going to leave you with this and I'm out, right? How much of your life still belongs to you? I want to hear about this in the comment section. Please keep up the random acts of kindness. I love all the people getting involved in beach cleanup. That's awesome, right? Going down to the beach with a group, and sad that we're picking up other people's garbage, but we're keeping our beaches a little bit cleaner. That's a great thing to do. Please keep doing it. And the animal people, I just love animals. I'm not like promoting any, right? I have one in mind that I love. I don't even mention that ever. I don't think I ever have. But I just do work with them or I donate money to them because it's really important to me, right? Or working at a, local soup kitchen. I try to give some time back, right? More than I have some days, right? Let's keep those coming in too. I want to hear more about that. Enjoy your week. Light up the comment section. Let's talk about this. Until next time, everybody, be safe, stay tuned.